Nearly 48 hours after we last saw Donald Trump in the flesh or heard his voice, tonight we got the first proof of life. A short time ago, he posted a video on Twitter where he, and not his doctors, gave an update on his status. Trump made a pitch for the experimental antibody cocktail Regeneron that he received while hospitalized at Walter Reed.
I want everybody to be given the same treatment as your president, because I feel great. I feel like perfect. So I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise.
I don't think he understands the meaning of blessing. He'd been absent from public view since this Mussolini moment at the White House on Monday at this very hour. And in his little video, he made no mention of the steroid treatment that he'd also received. And this afternoon, the infected and contagious president took his profligate handling of his own personal coronavirus outbreak to new depths, breaking quarantine and heading from the residence to the Oval Office. A Marine stationed outside the entrance of the West Wing signaled that Trump was inside. A senior administration official said he did not walk through the building, but he still somehow got there. Meanwhile, there are more questions than answers about Trump's condition. The Daily Beast reports that on the same day last week that Trump acknowledged contracting the coronavirus, the White House quietly informed a veterans group that there was a COVID-19 risk stemming from a September 27th event honoring the families of fallen U.S. service members, according to the head of the charity behind the event. Outreach following the event, shown here, would have been the first acknowledgement to visitors of the virus, raising questions about whether there were any COVID-positive people in attendance, even as the White House itself remains a hotspot. 18 people tied to the White House or to the campaign have tested positive so far, with top aide Stephen Miller the most recent addition to the list. And today, the White House told staff that, quote, all contact tracing was completed for positive COVID-19 cases identified at the White House. While Trump was behind closed doors today, we did hear from his Twitter account, which unleashed a deluge of erratic tweets, more than 50 in the early morning hours alone. But as we know, Trump is not the only one who runs his Twitter feed, so is he even sending them out? I don't know. Meanwhile, Trump has yet to show any empathy, none, for people who don't have the resources that he has. In a series of tweets last night, he abruptly called off talks with Capitol Hill on a coronavirus relief package, then demanded that Congress approve the relief anyway and said he'd approve the funding for some industries hours later. Now, you would think that Trump would recognize his last political lifeline as this rollicking disaster goes down the drain, especially after another round of polls today show him losing badly to Joe Biden. And after he took another direct hit from a federal court, which declined to block a subpoena for his tax returns. Today, Speaker Nancy Pelosi stated the obvious.
Well, it's hard to see any clear, sane path on anything that he's doing. But the fact is that he saw the political downside of his statement of walking away from the negotiations. All he has ever wanted in the negotiation was to send out a check with his name printed on it.
Is it time to pick up the phone? Do you want to go over to the White House? What's the best way to work this out now?
I wouldn't go anywhere near the White House. It's one of the most dangerous places in the country.
Despite that, we're still seeing egregious behavior coming from this White House. Just take a look at this group of young staffers congregated at lunchtime, mostly without masks, at the executive office building. So much for lessons learned. Joining me now, Olivia Troy, former top aide to Vice President Mike Pence. Dr. Naheed Badilia, medical director of the Special Pathogens Unit at the Boston University School of Medicine, and Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. Where to respond, where to respond, where to respond. Donald Trump said it was a blessing that he caught COVID. Here's Joe Biden's response.
I think it's a tragedy that the president deals with COVID like it is something not to be worried about. When all the way 210,000 people would die. I think it's a travesty.
You know, Olivia Troy, you were an aide to Vice President Mike Pence, who's the head of the coronavirus task force. He has to defend this, whatever we're calling this, this parade of weird that's coming out of the White House in tonight's debate. Can you give us some sort of an inside view as to what goes on in this White House in terms of the relationship between Donald Trump and staff? Is there anyone, you know, from what you saw, and I know you worked for Pence and not Trump directly, that could possibly talk him down, roid rage or not, into just continuing to openly spread this virus and to pretend that it is a blessing that he got it?
Well, I certainly saw, task force members at times, including the VP himself. I mean, I certainly saw people try and weigh in and explicitly try to get the president to cooperate in what we were trying to do in terms of the pandemic response, including, wear a mask, tell people it's okay to wear a mask, recognize the severity of the virus. But Donald Trump will do what Donald Trump wants to do. And it's just a clear example of the president only caring about himself. And quite frankly, calling it a blessing is just so offensive to me and just so disrespectful to all of the lives that have been lost, not only domestically, but globally. I'm sure that those families don't consider it a blessing that they saw someone suffer and eventually lost a loved one. I think that's just so embarrassing that our president would ever say that.
Dr. Bedelia, there's a lot of questions about Donald. He keeps putting out these videos to try to look robust. He doesn't. There's a lot of makeup on there, which somebody had to get close enough to him to put on, which is terrifying for whoever that person was. But it's not even clear what Donald Trump's health is, to be honest with you. I want to play for you. This is Brian Morgenstern. He's a deputy press secretary. And he's asked a really simple question that would be really important for the American people to know. When's the last time Donald Trump actually tested negative for the coronavirus? Here he is.
Why can't the White House say when he last tested negative?
Look, we've addressed this. We're not asking to go back through a bunch of records and look backwards.
What we do know is they won't tell us when he last tested negative, and I want you to just explain to me the significance of that. We do know now from the reporting of the New York Times that he wasn't getting tested every day, so we know that wasn't happening. And we know he's on some sort of a steroid treatment, which, according to the New York Times, some White House staff members are wondering whether his behavior might be tied to it. Because he certainly seems amped up and saying, I feel better than I ever have in 20 years. Like, this behavior is even weird for Donald Trump. And I wonder if those staff members who are concerned that maybe the steroids that could be causing mood swings and a false sense of energy and even euphoria, that's what White House aides are worried about. Is that a legitimate concern given what we think he's taking?
Good evening, Joy. Yes, steroids can cause confusion, and they can cause, in certain cases, for patients who are elderly and who are admitted, which he no longer is in the hospital, but they can cause confusion, particularly in patients who are older and maybe on other medications as well. But, how would you know? I think when you look at the White House's handling of this event, of the Rose Garden, and the reason why the last negative test is important is because we need to have a sense of how far-reaching the impact of that Rose Garden event is, because I don't see it as one event. It is then the hundreds of following events that happened after that, when a positive person that resulted from that Rose Garden event went on to expose others. And the fact that the White House hasn't handled the contact tracing as they should, the testing around that as they should, it is a microcosm of the way that we've handled this pandemic. Today, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the most reputable journals in medicine, the editorial board, it's existed for about 200 years, this journal, says that the Trump administration has basically taken a crisis and turned it into a tragedy. And that's what it is. And then today, when he talked about this being a miracle, it's certainly not. If the White House can't even protect the president against this pandemic, what hope do we have, the rest of us have, against being protected against this virus by this administration?
Yeah, and let me just read you, speaking of that, and people sort of seeing the disaster that Donald Trump may not want to see, but everyone else can see it. The former CDC director, his name is William Fagin, I think you pronounce his name. He wrote a private letter to the current CDC director, Robert Redfield, and this was last month. And he wrote that this mess of the coronavirus handling will go down as a colossal failure of the public health system of this country. We let the country down. You have a short window to change things. You could send a letter to all CDC employees, acknowledge the tragedy of responding poorly, apologize for what has happened, and your role in acquiescing. When they fire you, this will be a multi-week story, and you can hold your head high. That's not what's happening, Jason. The CDC is not even being allowed to participate in this contact tracing that we think went on. We have to take their word for it. It's not clear. The fact that a group of families of fallen military troops was allowed into the White House, and they said, oh, by the way, later on told them, by the way, you could have gotten infected with this deadly disease. Sorry, maybe not even sorry. It is a disaster, Jason, from a political point of view.
It's a disaster from a political point of view, Joy. It's a disaster from an economic point of view. The fundraiser that they had in Minneapolis, now a lot of those servers and people like that have to quarantine. But I want people to understand, like, track and trace can work, too. That's why Trump doesn't want it to happen. There's a story I read earlier today about, the recent outbreak in New Zealand. They had track and trace so well that they traced the contact points to COVID to, like, a button on an elevator and a garbage can lid. Like, you can track this kind of information if you put effort into it. But Donald Trump is not going to allow anyone to do their job. He doesn't want a virus expert. You can have the CDC, Dustin Hoffman from Pandemic, and Brad Pitt from Zombies. It doesn't matter. You can have the best, most exciting experts in the world. Donald Trump and this administration do not want the truth to come out. They do not want the public to know how irresponsible they've been and who they have hurt. And I don't want this to happen. No one wants this to happen. But in all likelihood, if we look at these numbers and we look at the percentages, someone's going to die. I mean, everybody wants to forget about how Herman Cain died at a Trump rally, but some staffer, some support person is going to die because of their negligence, and they're not going to have an answer for that either. And
I don't think Donald Trump has mentioned Herman Cain by name, and that was one of his biggest supporters, even after death. The daughters are still tweeting, COVID's not so bad. Your father's dead. So, we know, and I'm going to go back to you, Olivia Troy, because you have worked inside this White House. We know that Donald Trump has received about $100,000 worth of treatment. He only paid $750 in taxes. So he didn't even pay for the treatment that he's getting. It's about $100,000 for the treatment he's gotten so far. Inside of the coronavirus task force, is there a single person left, other than Dr. Fauci, who is sort of missing in action, other than he occasionally turns up on CNN? We'd love to have him on the show, by the way, who actually is knowledgeable enough to get us through just December. Because we're still, even if Donald Trump were to lose the election, we're still stuck with him in charge until January 20th. Is there anyone left that you can recall on that task force that has the basic competence to just get us through December?
Well, I will answer this very bluntly and honestly. I think other than Dr. Fauci, I think there's Dr. Birx, who is competent if she's willing to do it and continue to fight and not let the dynamics sway her in any way. And the other person that I would say without hesitation is Dr. Hahn, who is the head of the FDA. And I mean that wholeheartedly.
Are you surprised that more people haven't resigned? Are you surprised more people haven't quit?
I am, and I'm not, to be honest. I think for some of these people who I know personally and who I know and seen have shown complete integrity, I would say that they continue to hang on because they are more scared of what would happen if they left. And I agree with that.
Before we go, can we just show the picture of the young, if we can get it quickly, the young people who ate lunch at the White House today, no masks on. The culture that they're teaching these young staffers is to just DGAF this virus. And it is deadly, and it can get those young people sick and their parents sick and their grandparents sick, and this administration literally doesn't care. There they are. That is what those young people are learning about government, that it doesn't matter if you get other people sick. And they're learning it from the President of the United States. Olivia Troy, thank you very much. Jason Johnson, Dr. Naheed Bhatia, thank you all. All right, let's take a live look.